Hosted by Dr. Alex G. on behalf of Serve Wisconsin AmeriCorps, Transform Your Leadership invites you as an AmeriCorps member to engage your own journey and transformation as you become leaders who enrich lives and communities. Now here's Dr. G.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to episode 3 of the Transform Your Leadership podcast. I want to refer to this segment as systems and structures. Leadership is not just about management, and it's not just about people doing what you tell them to do. In the last segment, I told you it's about vulnerability and understanding your story and using it to relate to others and motivate others. But this segment talks about the systems and structures that hold people in these ugly places of poverty or unemployment or academic disparities, racial disparities. And so I believe that leaders have got to do more than just influence those within their care, but they've got to say something, do something about the systems that perpetuate these issues. Stay with me. I'll tell you a little bit more about this. If you want to see sustained change, you can't just focus on the individual that you're serving. You've got to look at their environment and the things that influence their environment. And so true and sustained change happens on at least 3 tiers concurrently. And these are 3 Ps. The first one is personal. That sustained change begins with a person. Are you going to educate yourself? Are you going to meet people who are different? Are you going to care about people? Are you going to read? Are you going to educate yourself? But true change begins on the very individual level. It's personal. The second one is procedural. You got to look at, all right, how do we call on children who are raising their hands in classes? How do we make hires? Who writes the personnel policies? Who creates the recruitment policies? Who creates the board policies? Who selects the boards? We've got to, that's got to be considered. That's got to be changed if we're going to have sustained change. And then on the third level, it's policy. There are rules. There are regulations. There are things that have got to be changed. That's why in the civil rights movement, Dr. King and others really focused on policies about voting and poverty and jobs and access and acquiring wealth and being able to go into banks and being able to purchase at a lunch counter. Policies had to be changed. And so once we look at change on a personal level, a procedural level, and on a policy level, we begin to see sustained change. Now, when those 3 things are happening, we can then enter the 4th P, which I refer to as programs. And the reason why I enter that one last is because we typically start with that one. We think if we can just get more programs, then everyone will be better. An analogy I use is that we struggle with clean lake issues in Wisconsin, particularly in Madison. And so if we merely pump more fish into a lake that's really laden with phosphorus and algae, it's just going to kill the fish you're putting in. But if we think, well, the fish will overwhelm the algae and they will outgrow it and outmultiply it and they'll eat it and then it'll go away. No. Then you got algae and dead fish, and that makes the lakes even dirtier. But if you change the environment, it allows the fish that you already have in the lakes and those you put into the lakes to live better. And so, but programming is like, well, let's just put more fish in the lake and it'll clean it up. Let's make more sandwiches. Let's get more school supplies. Let's get more bus tickets. Let's get more of this. Let's just get more of that. The problem with programs alone, and my organization runs programs, so I'm not anti-program, but the problem with programs alone is that, one, it does not provide sustained change because its focus is hierarchical. Programming is based upon, I have information and I'm going to teach it to you. I have a sandwich and I'm going to give it to you. I have bus tickets and I'm going to give it to you. I have access and I may grant it to you, but it's me to you. It's me to you. There's no sense that in making you stronger or whole, it makes me and the community better. I make the community better by giving you things that make you dependent on me. That's what I mean by hierarchical. It creates dependency. And typically it's client focused. These folks are clients. They're not partners. They're not people who can help you build your community or even build your organization or build your vision. The people you will be serving can actually help to make your organization reach its goals, not because they complete your services, but because they speak back into the process. And so once we have personal change, procedural change, and policy change, then programs can get more traction because they don't stand alone. So again, I'm not anti-programs. We need programs, but true change means that people have got to think differently. There have got to be different rules, and there have got to be different governing laws and regulations if we're going to see a real better world. And so, and then with just a program only focused, failure is typically only seen as the client's fault. So if I'm going to give you a sandwich or I'm going to give you school supplies and you don't show up, that means you're not serious. It couldn't possibly mean that I'm handing them out at 10 o'clock in the morning and you're at work. It can possibly mean that that's the case. You didn't want it. You didn't see it as being serious. You weren't committed enough. And so if program delivery doesn't work, we blame the client, again, in air quotes. But we didn't ask the client if this is what you wanted, if this is what you needed, and if this is what's going to help you to succeed. Someone else decides you need this, and so we're going to create this transaction, and we're going to tell you that we're going to give it or offer it or do it on Wednesdays at noon, come hell or high water. And if you don't show up, we knew they weren't serious. So that's why change has got to be broader than programmatic. I want to tell a few stories about how individuals have used their stories to really have an impact on systems. I do a lot of work in racial harmony, racial healing, working to get rid of the racial disparities in my community. And so one of the things that I do to really connect with a group of folks we called would-be white allies, and many of them are would-be non-black allies because other ethnic groups have joined this program, but it was mainly designed for our white would-be allies who were moved by racial disparities and wanted to do something to be part of the solution. So I created a history course that uses faculty from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And for 9 weeks, we have a 2-hour learning experience, 1 hour lecture, 1 hour small group. Now, we tell the people who are there, hey, this is Wisconsin, this is Madison. We're kind of intellectual. We like to take information and feel smarter than everyone else and not necessarily feel any responsibility to be changed by the knowledge, but we certainly want to be impressive with this knowledge. We said, this is not that program and this is not that opportunity. And so we tell them that after the 9 weeks of these lessons, we're going to challenge you and mobilize you and help you to do something with what you've learned. Because we are not educating you for the sake of having you be educated. If intelligence alone could have solved the race problem, it would have been solved long ago because we have lots of smart people, but we don't have enough mobilized people who are doing something with the knowledge. Well, after 9 weeks, people are saying, I want to know what to do. I want to do something. I have all this information. My eyes have been open. I didn't know this. I never learned this. How is this withheld from me? And so we started increasing our staff and hiring people to help us to mobilize folks. So we've created things like book groups, and we created something that's called a court observers program. There are a group of people who went through the history class who are just torn apart by the injustice in our criminal justice system. And so they've organized themselves. We've trained them, but they actually have created an interview sheet. They sit on actual court cases. They write down information about the judge, the DA, the public defender, the defendant. They've observed over 337 cases. I don't think any other nonprofit has the kind of data we do on cases. They are observing and noting how people of color are treated different in these procedures. After sitting through many of these cases, the judges started saying, hey, who are you? What are you doing here? They said, well, we're part of Justified Anger. It's an initiative of Nehemiah. We want to observe the criminal justice system. We're sitting in on cases, and we are just taking notes on how Black and brown people are treated in comparison to their white counterparts. It became so common for this to happen that a local news station did a story on the influence of these folks, and 4 of the judges enrolled in the next U.S. Black History course. The next year, 4 judges went through 9 of the courses for 9 weeks. Now, let me just take it a little further. These individuals who took this course, they wanted their eyes to be open and they wanted to substantiate the fact that they were woke. But they realized that being woke was more than just sitting in a seat and getting information. They did something. And even though sitting in a courtroom might not have seemed like a powerful act, it actually puts some pressure on the judicial system to cause four of the judges to come and hear what they heard that made them want to come and sit in their courtrooms on their own time. Do you know how many staff members I would have needed to hire to observe 337 cases? Do you understand how much time and how much money that is? These are volunteers who take their own time off of work to be a part of the solution. They can't fix everything. They might not want to march, but they can sit in a court, they can take notes, and they can consistently combine information about how people of color are treated. The next step of these individuals will be to become court navigators, which means they'll help people get rides to court. But the ultimate goal is that they will become court advocates so that people in the community will call our organization and say, my son, my daughter, or I have a court appearance. Can one of the court advocates come with me to that hearing? This started with individuals who learned history, who understood that there are systemic things in place that cause men and women of color to be incarcerated more than their white counterparts. In Wisconsin, where black people are 5% of the state's population, we're close to 50% of the prison population for men. That's injustice because we know, we have the data. Black people on a per capita basis do not commit more crime or snort more coke than their white counterparts. So then what is happening? What's going on? Well, there's over-policing and there's profiling, and I won't even go down that road. You know where I'm heading with that. And so the court observers aren't tasked with talking with police officers or interviewing people who have been profiled, but they're sitting in courtrooms and they're having an impact. Their story has tied them to the stories of those who are broken. Their stories as Americans who are learning about the systemic oppressive history of the United States. I love America, but that is our history. And they somehow felt tied to it. And they are, because they have benefited from it, even though their families may not have individual wealth. Because of who they are and how they look, there are certain benefits bequeathed to them because they are of European descent. And someone in their families decades ago took on the social context called white, and it gave them access and rights, inalienable rights that their counterparts of color didn't have. But they used the fact that their story intertwined with America's story, which meant that it also intertwined with the story of those who were oppressed by America. But they wanted to do more than just be white and guilty. They wanted to do something to make a change, and they have. One of the judges invited me to do what I call a ride along, and I was able to go with them and sit with them in their bench as they tried cases. It was fascinating. If you ever get a chance to do something like that, do it. I loved it. But then as we were in their chambers afterwards, they said, you know, every day in this court, I think about that history class. And I had a gentleman in my court, Dr. G, and he kept coming back again and again and again because he was breaking curfew. And so it's costing him money. It's racking up the charges. It's getting him deeper and deeper in trouble. And I thought about the class, and the class taught me to ask, what can I do to be helpful in this process? Not fix you, not fix it, but to be helpful. And he said, Your Honor, I'm breaking curfew because I have a job. If you take my curfew away, I won't keep appearing in your court. I'm working to support myself and my family, and I won't be breaking violations. I'm not committing new crimes. I just keep breaking a rule because I have a job. The judge said they changed it, lifted the curfew, or made it later. The judge said that person never appeared in their court again. And they said to me, I had that authority. It's my courtroom. I can set the rules, but I never thought I could, or that I should, or that it would change someone's life. What I think they were really saying was that being unfair by giving them that opportunity. But they talked to me with such joy that by understanding the scenario and the systems, this person was being penalized for working the only job they could get, and it continued to make them break curfew. Well, 10 o'clock was just arbitrarily chosen. There's nothing magical about 10 o'clock. They didn't turn into pumpkins at 10, but someone said it. And so if you're not home and your ankle bracelet goes off, the police are dispatched to arrest you. The judge fixed that by using their story being tied to the story of their courtroom and its history, and those who sit in it, and realize that place, that courtroom of oppression, could be a place that could liberate people if they saw themselves as someone with a story that could be helpful to others, and someone who had a story that offered authority to change the system. In the last segment, I talked about a group of parasocial workers. We call them community support specialists. And we talked about hiring about 6 of them. And let me tell you, this was a lively crew. After they were hired and doing a bang-up job, really, really excellent workers, one of them said, "Dr. G, I'm so glad you gave me a chance to do this. I got high like 2 hours before the interview because I didn't think I was going to get the job anyway." And then another person, after being offered the job, had to be talked into taking the job because they said, "I'm going to lose my subsidized housing if I take this job." This was their first full-time job. Correction, their first legal full-time job. But these folks were hired. And let me tell you something. They used their stories to relate to the folks in the community. Their job, as I said before, was to work with the social workers. And this was the job description as it was written by Human Services. Hand out bus tickets, hand out meal tickets, take applications to their homes. If they need a job, if they need a ride to a job interview, take them there. Well, these folks started creating support groups, and they started creating empowerment groups, and they started teaching parents how to parent and how to go to school and advocate for your children. And then they would come back to the staffing meetings with the social workers and say, this person keeps offending because, or this person keeps getting put out of their apartments because of this issue. So let's challenge the landlords. Let's challenge the principals. Let's challenge the employers so that we can give this person a fair shake. And so my staff members began to influence the social workers who sort of served as their supervisors, who then began to speak truth to power. Again, whether it's in school, business, healthcare systems, and people began to think differently about the folks who were served in their systems. Now, to make this situation even sweeter, these community support specialists were supervised by a person with a master's degree who was my mother, who was a single mom, had been in domestic violence, was a high school dropout. When my mom applied for college, she'd only gone to high school her freshman year and dropped out before the end of freshman year. Came to Wisconsin and got her undergraduate degree and her master's degree on a full fellowship and went to grad school for free and graduated with honors. So she was a Black woman serving as a family counselor to Black women who were also from Chicago, who had been in similar situations, who had come to Madison for better life, and who were trying to navigate Madison and advocate for their children. Well, my mother could relate because of her story and her life experiences. And so this team was just killing it. They were serving folks. We spoke 3 languages at our staff meetings because we were serving the African American community, the Latino community, the Southeast Asian community. We were, of course, serving the white community. And we were specializing in the Black community because our staff was predominantly Black. And so there was no organization of our size or larger that had the kind of diverse scope and diverse service and expertise. It was powerful. But these folks spoke truth to power. My mother, being my mother, would convey to the social workers and the supervisors what they needed to do. She highlighted the cultural incompetence of their staff and challenged the system and spoke that truth to power, because she realized that, yes, she had work to do with those whom she served, but in order to really serve them, she would also have to challenge some of the systems that were unfair to them. And so finding a way to use their authentic selves and stories to relate to those who they served, but to also speak to power systems about how they needed to change. And they had data to back it up, and they had good outcomes to back it up, and they were committed, and they came to work like it was a calling and not like it was a job. It was phenomenal. In one of the sites, the social worker unfortunately passed away from cancer. And one of the parasocial workers on my team, not another social worker from Human Services, this person without a degree was asked to lead that office, that community-based office. She was asked to run it in place of that social worker who had died. But wait, the story gets better. That gentleman who died, he and my staff member became good friends, but he recused himself in the interview process because when she was 14 years old and a teen mother, she was on his client case. She was part of his caseload. So when she came to interview and he saw her, he said, I can't interview her because she was my client. I knew what she was like. I knew how she used. Thank God he didn't know that she had used 2 hours before the interview. He recused himself, but in recusing himself, he said to me, I absolutely do not support that hire. I know her background. I know what she's been through. I do not support her. And left the room. We hired her anyway because we knew her story. You know how we roll. We knew that her story would relate to those in the community much better than his, because his bachelor's degree and his social work license did not mean that he could connect with those in his community. Well, you fast forward several years, he and that former client became colleagues. He mentored her. They became friends. And at his funeral, his widow asked my staff member to speak on his behalf. They went from being social worker client to recused supervisor, new hiree, to becoming colleagues, to becoming friends, to becoming a woman who managed in his stead. Do you know how much Human Services saved? That woman was making $10 an hour. And I get it, this was 20 years ago. She was making $10 an hour managing that office. And she spoke at his funeral. She and my other community worker who didn't want the job because she didn't want to lose subsidized housing, they went on to get their associate's degree while they were working for me. Then both of them got their bachelor's degree. And then both of them got their master's degrees. One is a family therapist. The other has a master's degree in Hebrew and is looking at PhD programs because she wants to teach. The one who's a counselor has her own state billing number. I'm probably using the wrong language because I'm not in that world. But what that means is she could sit down and talk to me and bill my insurance. She's that bad. These were folks who were drug users. Their children were taken from them, the children in foster care. But because my mother could relate and nurtured them and supervised them, they grew as paraprofessionals. No one uses para when referring to them anymore. These are women with master's degrees from major institutions who are rocking it in their respective fields. But it's because people challenged the system for them. And so now they are committing their lives to challenging the systems for others. How do you take your specific story, the one that you have, and use it to influence or work within the system or the structure? A transformational leader is also an ally, and allies dismantle unjust systems. Now, you're currently working in systems and structures with your supervisors, and as AmeriCorps members, you have people training you and helping to develop you, and you have been placed within organizations, agencies, schools. Is your job just to keep and help those systems and those structural systems stay in place, particularly the ones who are hindering the people that you love, that you're serving, that you're working with? Is your job just to keep correcting the person who's bumping up against a crooked and a broken system? Or is your job to empower that leader, but when it's possible, when it's appropriate, and you should know when or where, what's your role to speak that truth to power, to challenge those structures, to challenge those systems, to make it better for everyone? How will you use your story to not just relate to the people you serve, but to dismantle the systems that you know are harmful? And so you've got to speak against them. If someone's interested in voting rights, they can't just say, let's get more cars and get people to the polls, because people who we are getting to the polls find a way to get to the mall. They find a way to get to Wendy's and Popeyes and Walmart and Macy's and work. Or is the issue that we also have to challenge gerrymandering and how we're adjusting voter registration? And do we have to look at that too? Yes, because the issue is not just that people aren't voting. Let's ask why they aren't voting. Why don't they believe voting works? Why don't they believe that their votes count? And if we're really going to get more people involved in the voting and political systems, then let's challenge crooked practices of moving those voting lines or making it difficult for some people to vote, as well as helping them to get to the polls. We've got to work both and, because if we think that people aren't voting just because they don't have rights, you don't know the community. People get where they want to get, but we haven't asked the question, why don't people vote? And what is creating the barriers to that? True leaders have got to give thought to the situations in which they work. And don't always look at the person you're serving. That's the personal P, but what are the procedures and what are the policies that are in place? Remember a little earlier, I said sustained change happens when you bring change on a personal level, procedural, and a policy level. There are policy and procedural realities that impede votes. So don't just tell people, get out and vote. Find out what the barriers are. Then you've helped to open doors so that even those who don't need rides to the polls may want to vote, because you've addressed other issues that impede their vote or impede their belief that their vote works. So you have a story. You're embracing it. It's allowing you to build leadership and capacity in those you serve. It's allowing you to connect and influence and inspire people to want to be part of change. But you don't want to tell people to suit up and run this way, and there's a wall that's there. So a true transformational leader will also look at what's blocking success, and they will build capacity in those they serve, and they will challenge the impeding systems, the impeding policies and procedures and perceptions that hinder that level of success. I think that everything hinges on leadership. I told you that in my very first segment. And I want you to have great success. And note that that has nothing to do with your perceived failure or mistakes. But I believe that if we're going to have real change, we don't just need do-gooders who feel good about their success, and they're either so happy about their success or so guilty over it that they need those less fortunate to help them cope. We need people who want to be transformational leaders, who want to inspire, who want to help people be different and be part of the change. But I need people to realize, society needs people to realize that in order to call out that wherewithal, our own stories may be the right bait to help people to understand theirs. But we don't stop there. Let's use the power of our story and how brokenness impacts us to be a partner and an ally that dismantles those things that demean people by creating barriers that must be broken. Disenfranchised people cannot build their own capacity and then break down every barrier. Leaders must be allies to help on that front. Your leadership must impact the systems and structures in which you work and live. That is your responsibility as a true transformational leader. Thank you so much for listening to episode 3 of the Transform Your Leadership podcast. I hope that this has been helpful to you. I have really enjoyed sharing these thoughts and these insights.